Today I'm joined by Joel Jenkins, a retired Army colonel and chaplain who has spent nearly 27 years serving our military men and women and their families. After 9/11, he mobilized to the Pentagon, where he poured into people and officiated the first memorial services for those killed in the attack. Colonel Jenkins later deployed to Iraq as a command chaplain, earning the Bronze Star for his important work supporting troops in contact. In his final assignment with the 82nd Airborne Division, he walked with families of the fallen and honored more than 150 of our heroes in uniform at memorial services across the country, including at Arlington National Cemetery. Joel is the author of this book, These Honored Dead, a tribute to America's military heroes, past, present, and future. He lives here in Charlottesville with his wife, Donna. He has 3 children and 5 grandchildren.
Yes.
And he just returned from visiting his 93-year-old mother.
Yeah.
Joel, welcome to the arena. Great having you here. Thanks for your
Thank you, Dan.
many years of service that continue. And so thank you. Thank you, Jesus, for this moment, for this wonderful servant, and for all the blessings you so graciously provide. Please be with us for our conversation, our continued service in this world, and please be with our community and our nation and our families. We need you now more than ever, Lord. In your name we pray.
Amen. Thank you, Dan, for having me. For one thing, excuse me, I had a little laryngitis recently, so I may have to clear my throat a few times. But yeah, we just got back from visiting my mother. She lives in Greenville, South Carolina. That's my hometown. Still lives at home. We went to the family reunion that includes her sisters. There's 3 sisters still surviving, one 95, one 93, and one almost 90. So every year, sometime during December, the family gathers. There were 68 of us at my cousin's home, and we had those older ladies there holding court, telling more stories and reminding us of some earlier stories. So it was just a great time, and then spending some days with my mother at her home, and my wife Donna was with me, and we just were able to love on Mom and just enjoy being with family. I have 2 sisters that live in the Greenville area, and a lot of family and friends, of course. So yeah, it was a great weekend. Glad to be back home, though. We delayed our trip a day because of the snow you guys had up here that we didn't have.
Sorry
down
about that.
there. Yeah. So we made it okay. Normally I drive my GMC 4-wheel, but I thought I'd save a few bucks and drove my wife's hybrid, but it's a 2-wheel drive, and I said I'm not going to try to go through Afton. I mean, not, excuse me, we don't come across Afton, but come up through Nelson County.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I'm glad you made it back,
Thank
and
you.
what a remarkable family and a great legacy you have there. 68 coming together. What's your secret? What's your mom's secret? Living long in such a robust life, and then also just kind of keeping that extended family together. We don't see that as much in our culture anymore.
We really don't. My wife's parents are deceased, and there's really no gathering of anyone on her side except she and her brother. They just don't have that. She didn't have as many cousins as I've had, for instance. My mother was one of 10 children. So when you multiply those 10 by their descendants, that's a lot of people that potentially can come. But the secret is, I think, just the way we've every year continued to gather. And over the years, we catch up with each other. We renew our relationships. And so I think just maintaining that commitment, okay, we're going to do this. And so far, everybody seems drawn back home. A lot of my family lives from California, other parts of the world even, but that's kind of the time that we all say, wait a minute, this is important, and we're going to gather, and we're going to break bread, and we're going to catch up, and we're going to sing a little bit, and we're just going to, just honor the heroes that have gone before us. My mother was, a child of the Depression, as was her family or children. My grandfather, with his 10 children, 2 of them ended up dying young from disease, but he and his 8 children, during the Depression, there was no work where he was. He was a carpenter. So he came to Virginia and set up his family in Elkton in a CCC camp that they put together to build the Skyland Drive. And so my grandfather helped build Skyland Drive. Because he had so many children, they gave him 2 cottages so he could spread his family out. Those are little small cottages they put people in. So every time I'm on the Skyland Drive, I wonder, did my grandfather put that stone in there, or what was he up to up here building this? And he was there for several years. So my mother has great memories of Elkton, going to school there and having friends among the CCC group. So a lot of children and people of this generation, they've never heard of CCC boys or CCC camps. So that's another kind of a historical piece that has touched our family. So anyway, to answer your question in a long version, my mother, I think her longevity is DNA, but it's just also her love of life.
Yeah, that spark. You can kind of see people that have that. Those eyes that sparkle and dance, and they find joy every day and not stress. That helps.
Absolutely.
That helps a lot.
And she's a person of strong faith. You know, she not only talks to us, but she talks to her Lord and draws strength from that. And she and her 95-year-old sister, they talk multiple times a day. The phone will ring, and it will be my aunt calling her mom, or mom's calling her. And so it's just wonderful that they still have each other.
Well, I'm glad you were all together. You talk about commitment and legacy and reaching across generations. I think about your experience and your time serving, especially after 9/11. And then I would stick back and look at the culture and where we are. We were just talking earlier, it's almost 25 years now. So Americans who are 25, 30 years old have no memory of 9/11. Now, they know the history of it, but it wasn't a lived moment for them. You mobilized after 9/11. You spent some time pouring into people in those days and weeks at the Pentagon. You officiated the first memorial services in the weeks afterwards for the victims of the attack. I guess take us back to those days. A refresher for some of us who lived it, and then for some that didn't live through it. Right. What did you see? What did you hear? I mean, what were you feeling during that time?
Well, I very much appreciate, Dan, that you are approaching this subject, because just like you said, the generation that's probably 30 or so years old, they have no memory. They were not aware of what the country was feeling at the time. I remember in spite of the suffering, there was a lot of positives during that time. The country seemed unified. It seemed like we were all sharing an experience together. I was serving in the Virginia Guard. I was a chaplain at that time for the 1st Brigade over in Stanton, Virginia, where our headquarters was. And I got a call, and anytime I get a call that begins with chaplain, I know it's military related. So the state chaplain called me very shortly after the event, and he said, Chaplain Jenkins, you're being mobilized to the Pentagon. And there were chaplains from Virginia, other chaplains from Maryland and Pennsylvania. The states around D.C. sent chaplains and chaplain assistants. So when we got there, they decided, okay, who's going to go where? One of my friends was sent down to be part of the recovery team. Another one was to be the hospital guy. Another one was to be with the families that were going to gather at the hotel there in Washington. And I was appointed because of my rank. I was a lieutenant colonel at the time. They said, you're going in the building, and there was a vacancy of the deputy Pentagon chaplain. So they said, you're going to fill that slot. So I went in and was introduced to Henry Haynes, who was the Pentagon chaplain. And by the way, a lot of people don't realize that even though you have the chief of chaplains of the Army and the Air Force and the Navy who have offices in the Pentagon, they don't do ministry. their teams don't do ministry. They do programs and planning. And so the Pentagon chaplain, who is a colonel's slot, he's the guy that takes care of the flock. 22,000 personnel normally. And so Henry, when I got there, he hadn't slept, and I think I got there 48 hours after, and he hadn't slept. So we barely knew each other. He handed me the keys to his office, and he said, "Here, I'm going home." So I said, "Fine with me." So anyway, the phone was ringing off the hook, trying to organize, and I ended up supervising the team of the reserve guys that came in. And there was still a lot of activity outside. They still had not recovered everyone. As a matter of fact, it hadn't actually changed from a rescue yet. They were still hopeful they would find someone alive. They didn't, but so it turned completely into a recovery. But my job eventually became planning services, officiating services, setting up round-the-clock chaplain support, because a lot of people also don't realize the Pentagon is an office building. They don't have weekend staff except skeleton down in the operations centers. People go home. They go home at evening at 5 o'clock. They go home. And so a lot of people don't realize that the Pentagon really, once 9/11 came, it became a 24/7 operation. So we maintained on-call chaplains around the clock. We were available to whoever wanted to talk, and a whole lot of stories in that direction. But it was really an interesting thing, the way that once I got there, I was thrown into the fire. Yeah. It was like, okay, we don't have a manual for this. We don't have a FM for this. You're going to have to figure this out.
Yeah, what was that human element like? You saw the courage, you saw the pain, you saw the uncertainty of what was going to come, the fear of the unknown of the coming weeks, still trying to figure out a lot of things. But at the same time, there was despair, death, injuries. That's where reservists in your background can really help too, because you've dealt with it for decades. And it's the same similar type of mission then, where you're interacting with people that need help. So what was that like as a human to human level?
Well, and I think that's probably, for my part, that's the most important facet in all this. Of course, it was traumatic. I mean, you typically think if you're in the military, you may get shot at, or you may come under attack if you're over on the front line somewhere. Eventually, of course, we ended up in Iraq and Afghanistan. And if you're in a place like that, you kind of anticipate, this is dangerous, man. Going to work, you don't know if you're going to survive the day. But at home, on American soil, to come under attack like that and see so many people killed in a mass event, the trauma of it was just debilitating almost. A lot of people that I ended up speaking with, I'll give you one quick example. An Air Force female colonel came into the chaplain's office maybe a week or so after I got there, and she said, "Do you have time that we can talk?" And I said, "Absolutely." She was so traumatized by the event, and she told me, she said, "I've seen the psychiatrist, I've spoken to therapists," and she said, "They're not helping me." She said, "They want to hypnotize me and go back so I can recover some lost time that I can't remember." But she said, "I don't want that." She said, "I really need to deal with the spiritual component in me that is at a loss. I don't even kind of know what to hold on to anymore." So, and actually she had some temporary amnesia. She said she woke up in the parking lot, and woke up as far as consciousness in the parking lot after the event in her car heading home, and she doesn't remember how she got there, and there was another person in the car with her that she didn't know. And she said that person was crying and almost in a fetal position, and I'm driving, and I wake up in the sense of where am I, and I'm in my car. And she said, so I went on home and hugged my children, but she said, I'm not right now in touch with anything that really helps me deal with this. So we had some long talks and conversations, and eventually she got to a place that she said, okay, I can function again. And that was just one example of people who were in the building. I know one day after I was there, the alarm went off, everybody go to the basement, everybody go to a secure area. We thought there was an attack coming, and it was a false alarm. But it set off everybody. I mean, everybody, you know, their pucker factor went up. It was like, okay, here we go again. And so it was kind of reliving that uncertainty for a lot of people in anticipation, okay, am I going to survive this? So it was dealing with the people who were there. I was not there when it happened. I came in, of course, 2 days later. But dealing with the people who were there, then everybody had their own story. I had a young lady who was a maid in the Pentagon. She was from Puerto Rico, didn't speak a word of English. She came in weeping, wanted to speak to a chaplain. I was the chaplain on call. It happened that our Pentagon chaplain assistant was Puerto Rican, Sergeant Monhay. And so he was helping me discern a little bit about what was going on. And she was terrified. She was crying. And so I asked permission through him, could he come in with us in the interview? And she said, yes. So in the interview, her story was that she and another maid from Puerto Rico, her best friend, were close to the impact site. And after the plane hit, a wall fell on her friend and trapped her. And she heard the screams of her friend when she was dying. Help me, help me. And she said, I couldn't help her. And she died. It's a terrible thing to think about, but she died when fire consumed her. And her friend hearing her dying screams. I mean, you talk about a living nightmare. That's something that's very hard to overcome. But that was where she was in that moment. That was her experience, losing her best friend, but not only losing her best friend, but being with her best friend, begging her to help her, and there was nothing she could do. So then it was story after story after story of people who were traumatized, even those who were not in the side of the Pentagon that was hit. They too wondered, are we next? And then their families got involved in it when they would go home. I don't want you going back to work. I'm afraid. So it was just much of that. But I will say this as a chaplain, the ministry opportunities, everybody in the building had a story. And everybody in the building I found were searching for something to hang this on, to hang their fears on, to hang their uncertainty on, to hang their hopes on. So chaplaincy work in the Pentagon at that time was full speed ahead, man. We didn't have to go looking for people to talk to. They were looking for us. We walked the halls. Hey, chaplain, can I speak to you a minute? And if it happened to be, we even had some foreign exchange military in the building who wanted to speak to a padre. And it was interesting because later in Iraq, I spent a lot of time with the Brits and the Australians, and they call their chaplains padres, so I was familiar with the term. So that gives you a little bit of the intensity of what was going on up there and how we stepped into it and just tried to be a little bit of light, a little bit of hope, a little bit of, you're still here, and there's a reason for that.
Yeah, I love that. How did that time period shape you? That the immediate aftermath of 9/11, the service you provided, going in for weeks and a couple of months, so not the long haul of that. We'll continue that conversation a little later, but that 6-week period, the intensity of it all, how did that shape you as a man, as a chaplain, as a Christian?
Well, I think that's a great question, and I'll have to say that it affected me in a lot of ways. One was a sense of vulnerability. If the Pentagon, the American emblem of our strength and of our ability to protect our citizens, if the Pentagon was vulnerable, if people who were in the Pentagon were targets, and didn't survive, then it did give me a sense of vulnerability, even not just about the military aspect of it, but just in life, just to realize we don't have tomorrow promised. So what we do today is all we really have that's confirmed if we live the day. So for me personally, it reminded me, even when I left the Pentagon and I came back into civilian life and stayed in the guard side of chaplaincy, it reminded me, okay, you need to be busy about this. You can't just assume, okay, I'm going to get around to that later. I'm going to speak to that person, at another point that has said they'd like to speak to me. And I've put them off and said, well, I'm busy right now, but how about tomorrow or the next day? Sometimes you have to do that. But it just gave you an awareness that today's precious, man. It's a gift. And so make the most of it. Realize, love the people around you. That's something that you always see anytime there's a school shooting or whatever. In law enforcement, I work a lot with law enforcement. And anytime there's something like that, the first responders, first thing they want to do, Dan, when they get home is hug their children. It's just like, okay, that could have been our family. Well, I saw that among the people in the Pentagon. Almost all of them, first thing they wanted to do, man, is go home and just hug their family and just love on them and just realize, okay, I was blessed to still be here, and I'm not going to take that for granted.
Yeah.
And then, doing the kinds of things I was involved in, I was part of a critical incident stress debriefing team. Had some interesting stories there. I was tasked to officiate at these memorial services. Chaplain Haynes, normally that would have been his role. But 2 weeks in was when we had the first one. I'll never forget it. Lieutenant Colonel Jerry Dickerson, Staff Sergeant Maudlin White, they were part of DESPER, the personnel side of things. And Chaplain Haynes, he said, Joel, you're going to have to do this. I got other things I got to do. And he did have a lot of command stuff he was involved in after that. So he said, you got this. You meet with the families. You meet with the command staff. And you plan this memorial service. And it was in the Pentagon Auditorium. And I did meet with Chaplain, not chaplains, but General Burns, who happened to be a 3-star in charge of DESPER. Met with him and his staff, and we planned the first one. And 2 days later, we did a second one. And so I met with then General Ellis, Lieutenant General Ellis, who later became a 4-star, but I met with him. And for that one, we normally would wear Class A's, but we had to wear BDUs because his Class A's were burned up. His office area was part of the building that was lost. He just didn't happen to be in there. But some of his staff were there. And so we did a memorial service for them. But the memorial service, I met with the families. And what helped me, Dan, as you mentioned, I'm a Protestant chaplain. I'm a Christian chaplain. And it just so happened that Colonel Dickerson and Sergeant White, they were of the Christian faith. And so that helped me because in meeting with their families, they did have that hope that this was not the end, that they would have that day later that they would be together again. And so that was a lot different than some of the memorial services that I did later in the Pentagon and even in Iraq and at Fort Bragg and even at Arlington, where I would meet families that they were not people of faith, of any faith, whether it would be Muslim, Jewish, Christian, or whatever. They had no faith. That was just their life journey. They were not people of faith. And it's really hard in those moments, even harder than the other services where you're dealing with the people of faith, whatever their faith might be, but particularly for me, Christian faith. These families, I couldn't come at it. Okay, this is not the end. You're going to read. Well, there was none of that. It was like, no, this is over. It's done. It's signed, sealed, and delivered. And for a chaplain, that's a tough call to try to. How am I going to offer these people any encouragement? What am I going to say to them? And so you just have to pray, and you just have to try to be compassionate and empathetic as best you can, and kind of follow their lead, and help them realize at least you still have the children or the rest of the family or whatever it is, and you just kind of point them in some direction. And if they ask, chaplains, we don't proselytize, we understand that, but if they ask, where do you get your strength from? Then, I'm very happy to tell them where I get my strength from. And so you just make yourself available. Somebody once told me that God would far rather have our availability than our ability. We're given abilities, but if we don't make ourselves available to be useful, and in this world, it's to others. Mm-hmm. It's to others. If we don't make ourselves available, then I don't care how much ability you've got. You're not going to be of help to anybody.
If you had a half a dozen teenagers or young college students in front of you, and you wanted to just kind of convey the lessons learned from that time period, what would be the 1, 2, or 3 key points you'd like to convey to those young people?
Well, I'm glad to be able to offer a couple of insights, I think. First, and this may seem strange, but I would say love your country. Be proud of your country. There's no perfect country in the world. But Dan, as we've seen in recent years especially, millions literally are risking their lives to come here. They see in America sometimes what we miss. They see that light that's been there since we were formed, that offers a better life, that offers opportunity, that offers liberty and freedom. So I would say to this generation, even with our imperfections, be grateful, because we didn't ask to be born where we were born or to live where we live. So just be grateful that you're in a nation where you can follow your own pursuits, you can follow your own dreams, where you can move and live anywhere you want to. And so just be grateful for your country, for one thing, and help solve the issues where we're not perfect, beginning where you live. Be a neighbor. I used to say to people, if you want to have a friend, be a friend. Just be a friend, and then you will have friends. So if you want to work with to help make America even greater, look where you are, and realize that it's not all about accumulating. It's not all about things. That's something the Pentagon taught me, that all of the things that were accumulated by those that were taken from us almost instantaneously, none of those things mattered anymore. They were gone. They really were always just temporary objects anyway that we thought would produce some kind of fulfillment. But I realized, even in more than I did before, that things don't provide fulfillment. It's not wrong to have things and enjoy life, but they're not the answer. They're not the source of meaning. They're not going to allow us to kind of find why are we here? What is our purpose? What's it all about? So I would say just be grateful for the opportunities that you have in life. Be grateful for the people that are around you. Be mindful of the people that are around you. When I was at the Pentagon, like I said earlier, you don't have to go very far to realize everybody's hurting. Everybody is struggling. So just come up to the next person you see and put a hand on the shoulder, because you are sharing an experience. Well, even in life, if you're in a classroom or if you're working, you're sharing life in that space with someone else. So anything you can do to be appreciative of life, anything you can do to be grateful, anything you can do to care about the people that are in front of you, but also remember the poor, remember the less fortunate. Almost every faith, every religion has an aspect of that. Well, why is that such an important teaching? It's because that's not the way we live. We live about me, mine, mine. And when I'm doing premarital counseling, I say, look, that's over. It's no more me, mine. It's we, us, and ours. And you have to look at that in that new context. But I think that's important in every stage of life. It's not me, mine, ours, or mine. It's we, us, and ours. So, but anyway, the lessons I would learn is be present. Don't think about, okay, I'm going to start living once I finish my degree, or I'm going to start living once I get to be at an accomplished place. No, don't miss this moment. It's your moment. And really, you're here for a reason, no matter, even if you're in a transition process of learning or becoming something you're not now, whether it's engineering or law or medicine, but live now.
I was talking to somebody the other day about the readiness delusion. A lot of people say they're not ready for that next step, whatever that life transition is, to buy that house, to get married, to take that job, to have kids. Nobody's fully ready for these things. And that's, every day in this fragile, finite world, just like they're in Notre Dame, play like a champion today. Every day,
That's
go
right.
out in this world and love and share with purpose. I love that. Thinking back to your book, there was a passage in your book, just kind of taking this time of 9/11 and then kind of moving forward to this long campaign of being at war. You commented here that somebody came up to you after one of those memorial services. Said, "Chaplain, we're at war. You just conducted the first memorial service of this new war. Many more are going to follow, aren't there?"
Yeah.
And you've seen many more. During your time in Iraq, which we'll talk about, your time with the 82nd Airborne Division, over 150 memorial services.
Yeah.
Young men and women who gave their lives, all those grieving families. It's a
Yeah.
long war.
Yeah, it is. And
And that guy was right. Many more did follow.
he was exactly right. And it is a long war. And something I always like to at least remind people of, since 9/11 until fairly recently, but people think we're the wars have ended, but in reality, our military serves in over 150 countries right now, and a lot of them are in dangerous places. They live in that world all the time, even though technically we're not in Afghanistan or Iraq doing what we used to do. We still have a lot of people embedded in Iraq. The 82nd Airborne has a battalion there now. People don't realize we're back in Iraq. Now, we're not doing missions per se, but we're dealing with insurgents, and we're dealing with some other types of things. ISIS put us back in Iraq, and I don't know that the Iraqis want us to leave again. But the whole idea of 9/11 starting something, and it's, again, we talked about the people that are 30 and younger that don't remember 9/11. Well, they also don't remember a time pretty much in their life when we weren't at war. And the thing I like to remind my fellow Americans is, this is the first time in our nation's history that we've been in a protracted conflict with all volunteers. You go back to the Revolutionary War, they were conscripts. And every war since, every major conflict, Civil War. You get into World War I, II, Vietnam, Korea, all conscripts. Not everybody was a conscript, but there were those that were drafted in every conflict. But since 9/11, it's all volunteers. And so, to me, it just says, America still produces some of the best of the best. Young people who will say, I'll go, and I'll do what I have to do. Now, a concern that I have, I was doing a briefing for a whole large company of paratroopers that had just gotten back from deployment. This group came in from Afghanistan, and I just out of curiosity said, how many of you come from families where your parents were military? And Dan, it was almost unanimous. And so what we're finding is that most of our military, their families were military. And we're getting a lot of our American citizens, they don't know anybody that's ever served. They don't know anybody that's ever served. And so we have to be real careful that we don't end up just taking one small element of our population and saying they're the mercenaries. Maybe we don't like that term, but we're dependent on the same families almost over and over and over to send their children. They went. Now their children are going, their children's children. And so I think it behooves us to be appreciative of what they're doing and grateful that they're willing, but to somehow create in the minds of all of our young people a sense of need to serve, not necessarily in the military, but in some form, to be a giver for the common good.
Yeah, some talk about the civil-military divide, and I don't think there is one anymore. There was one during the Vietnam era and other times. The civil-military partnership, some will talk about. There's a partnership.
Yeah.
But I don't even like that phrase because we're not partners. We're the same.
Yeah.
We're the same body, and some of us are going to serve in this way, which is a great way.
Yeah.
Some of us are going to serve in other ways, which are wonderful ways. There's an infinite number of ways to serve in this world, but we need good ones to step up here. And after 9/11, that's another lesson learned. Is you talked earlier about the unifying nature of that attack,
Right.
and the number of people that stepped forward to want to serve in the military spiked, just like it did post-world after Pearl Harbor.
Right.
Spiked. So that's one good thing, but how do you keep that energy, that enthusiasm, that patriotism alive? And it's tough. It's tough. How well have we done? And even how do you think we've done in that front? And what are some things, even on the home front now, being an active veteran and in doing things with different local organizations? How are we doing, and how can we improve generationally and just amongst each other in a community?
Well, I think that there's several facets that I approach. One is to support the annual events that honor the fallen, Memorial Day, keeping that in front of the broader country and just reminding everybody it's not just about flipping burgers you get at a holiday. No, it's a Memorial Day. It's to remember those who died. There were over 1 million in our history have fallen serving our country, and their hopes ended, their dreams ended, and many of them left to go to foreign lands and never came home. So I think to remember those who made the sacrifice and to educate the children that of what Veterans Day means, those who've been willing to serve. Maybe they did survive, but they're still a veteran. That means they put the uniform on. And I tell you, Dan, 9/11 to me, the military aspect of it, I was very much involved in. But my wife and I went to New York City on the first anniversary of 9/11, and we walked the ground where the towers were. And it happened to be a damp day, and you could just still smell almost a smoky smell. A year later, it was almost like the ground was saying, I won't let you forget. And then we went back later, and we went through the museum that they have there in Tower 1, and you could just see the artifacts of partially burned fire trucks. But I do mention in the book some things about how some people almost built in a certain way, like when the planes hit the towers, thousands were running out, which they should have done, but hundreds were running in. I mean, we lost almost 500 first responders that went into the buildings, the EMTs, the firemen, the police, going in to save people. But I see that every day here in Charlottesville and Albemarle County, that we have these folks that when others are trying to run away, they're running in. They're going in. And that's a little bit what I was referring to earlier about how do I fit in. Not everybody can be an EMT, Dan. Not everybody can be a fireman. Not everybody can be in law enforcement or some service like that. So we need to be supportive of those people that every day. I have a son-in-law who's a policeman. I have two nephews that are city police in Greenville, South Carolina. One of them was shot in the line of duty. Still wears the scars as a policeman. And so, 9/11 just kind of brought it all to the front for me of that type of person that is willing to stand up for the rest of the country and say, hey, I'll be that line of defense. I'll be that one that will kind of keep you safe and protect your life. But I think we just have to remind everybody, including ourselves, don't take anything for granted. And what can I do to be a better person, a better American?
Thanks for sharing that. I had a conversation with a spouse of a police officer years ago, and he was also a reservist in the military, and she shared a vulnerability with her every morning. Her husband, as a police officer, would walk out the door with a bulletproof vest on. When a spouse sees that, there's something special. There's something really challenging with that dynamic, and we just need to support those in law enforcement so much. Anybody that's going to be on that front line in a profession where they have to wear a bulletproof vest every day, even in the military, active duty for 20 plus years.
Right.
In Iraq, Afghanistan, other parts of the Middle East, yes, for 24 months, but the other 18 years, I didn't go to work with a bulletproof vest on.
Yeah.
Our friends in uniform locally do that. And so, we need to remember that and appreciate that.
Yeah, I kind of see the military and the law enforcement and fire and EMS and those folks, I kind of see them as all frontline people. They're all ready for whatever comes their way. And it may be life-threatening that they're willing to risk their lives. Or really, if you're going to put that vest on, you're basically saying, I'm willing to risk my life. Because sometimes it comes to you. You don't have to go looking for trouble when you're in those professions.
Yeah, you're almost on retainer.
Yeah.
For whatever, for your nation.
I do want to quickly just give you one story from the Pentagon before we move completely alone. I was part of a critical incident stress debriefing team. We had a psychiatrist, we had a social worker, and we had a chaplain. And they were making sure the Pentagon required everybody who was in the building on 9/11 to do what they called a cleansing exercise. And it depended on where you were in the building as to what they required. But if you were at all in the side where there was the trauma, you were required to go through these debriefings. And you would do a debriefing with the people that you shared the experience with. So I was in a debriefing on this one occasion. There was 13 people that worked together that shared the experience. They were in the same office when it happened. And so they were brought into the debriefing, and the psychiatrist was giving the rules of the debriefing. We're going to go around. Everybody's going to tell us where they were and what they were feeling and so on and so forth. Well, everybody in that group, before they would follow the psychiatrist's guidance, everybody but one pointed to the one. He happened to be an Army Master Sergeant, and even a 2-star general was in that group. But every one of them said, that man saved my life. That man saved my life. And so my curiosity was up. And so they went on and told the story that when the plane hit, immediately everything became black and you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. It was acrid smoke. It was heat. And all 12 of those folks shared they thought they were going to die. They said, this is it. There's no way out. We can't see anything. Heat all the way around. There's no way out. And so what had happened was when the plane hit, the master sergeant who was stepping out of the office at that time was thrown down the hall. So he immediately went to the rally point, which they told us to do if there was an emergency. You go so we can get a head check. Well, there was nobody there but him. And so he immediately decided, I'm going back in. So he went back in and he got a flashlight from one of he broke the glass on a response place where you could get an axe and you could get a light and you could get a fire extinguisher. He got a flashlight and he began to crawl back in to where he came from, not knowing if anybody was alive, and he began to call out. And he said, "Can you hear my voice?" And the people in the group, every one of them said, "Yes, we hear you, we hear you." And he said, "Get down on your hands and knees to get under as much heat as possible and smoke, and follow my voice, come to my voice." But then he said something that, as a chaplain, that just stuck with me. He said, "Come to the light." And he was the light. You know, he had the light, and he said, "Come to the light." And all 12 of them survived. Now, when we had that debriefing, several of them, one of them was wearing a shoulder bandage. Several of them had burns that were not third degree, but all of them were very close to not being able to breathe and sucking in that heated air. They were all close to death, but they survived because this man decided, "I'm going back." And he represented so many others for me that said, "I'll go. And it may cost me my life, but I'm going to do what I can do. I'm going to bring what I can to the moment." And so all of them, it really stuck with me that every one of them, before they would say anything else, "That man saved my life." And for the rest of their lives, they felt the debt. So I guess in a broader sense, even people I've never met, I'm on the Dogwood Vietnam Memorial Foundation Committee, and every year we honor those Vietnam vets from around here that gave their lives. I didn't know any of those guys, but I support that because in one sense, they went for me. And so as long as I realize and appreciate sacrifices made by others, whether it's local sacrifices or whether it's a sacrifice on a foreign land somewhere, I don't want to be the guy that says, "I'm just going to live my life and forget the fact that somebody paid a heavy price that I would be able to reach my goals and have my dreams fulfilled and enjoy the moments of my family." So I guess it all for me goes back to this same theme, that 9/11 for me reminded me again of the vulnerabilities of it all, but also of what's important, what matters, what really is going to matter when the end comes. What matters? And it matters, I think, faith, family, and for me, patriotism. You know, I want America to be as great as she can be because America is a beacon and America cares. I mean, you've been there and I've been there. We see that Americans have a good heart. When we go in even to war zones, I went to many exercises in Iraq where we went into schools and hospitals and we took food and we took clothing and we took medicine. And it was like, we want to care. We want to offer something. When I was in Iraq, I knew George Gelnovich, who was the head soccer coach here at UVA. He was a friend of mine. And I contacted George and I said, "George, can you send me some soccer balls?" The Iraqi kids love soccer. And we would go into some of these villages. Some of those children walked in on a cold day with no shoes. But we would give them soccer balls and little air pumps. And I'll tell you something, it was the antithesis to what Al-Qaeda was doing. There were villages where we actually reclaimed rubber guns that Al-Qaeda was giving to children, just a little small AK-47 model, so that our soldiers would mistake that child for a threat and possibly kill an innocent child. Al-Qaeda was doing that, giving fake weapons to children. Well, we would go and trade them a soccer ball. "Hey, I'll trade you a soccer ball for that gun." And we actually swapped out some weapons they were toys, but a lot of them looked very real. And in a dark evening or a shadow or a silhouette, you never know. And so I just saw the difference in the way people choose to live.
Appreciate you sharing that, because a beacon of goodness is a good way to say it. I mean, war is awful, and you see the worst of humans, but you see the best of humans too, with the courage and the selfless nature of acts of bravery. And then how do you remember those and appreciate that? And how do you, like you said with Vietnam, I didn't know any of them individually, but I hear Joel is actively remembering them by doing things to honor that, and then at the same time serving in a way where you're passing it forward. They had the courage to serve in their way. What am I doing right now today to serve others? And I think that's part of the active nature of remembering is to take that baton and continue to serve in some way. So thank you for sharing that. Let's talk a bit about your ministry in Iraq and at the 82nd. Those men and women doing unthinkable things for each other, for our nation, the loss, the courage, the despair, the hope, the guilt, the survivor's guilt that comes into some of that. We all feel it. We all know others have felt it in some ways. Talk a bit, maybe some examples, and just kind of the front lines nature of ministry to that population.
Well, it's interesting, Dan, that's bringing back a lot of rush of memories for me, just as we contemplate it. But I will say this, that in spite of the heaviness of what we're talking about, I found to keep an even keel, I just had to also keep my sense of humor.
Yeah.
And I remember even in Iraq, I got a call to my office that there was a CENTCOM chaplain coming over for a visit. He was Chaplain Dull. He was a chaplain colonel. He was the CENTCOM chaplain, and he was Air Force, but he was coming over. And he wanted to go out to a FOB or something. He wanted to go visit troops. Well, the command I was in, we went out every week. Our guys were embedded with the Iraqis. So my chaplain assistant and I, we either went out by convoy or we flew most of the time because we were going all over Iraq, Al-Assad, to Korea. It didn't matter. We were somewhere, and we would go spend 3 or 4 days with these embedded guys, take them care packages, do a chapel service. So we were always on the move. So they called me. They knew we were on the move. So they said, hey, we got this chaplain coming in, CENTCOM. He wants to go somewhere. Can you take him with you? I said, well, we're going down to Rocket Maya, Rusta Maya, nicknamed Rocket Maya. I said, we're going down to Rusta Maya if he wants to go. So he did, and a lot of rockets came into there all the time, and mortars too, mostly rockets. So they were coming in while we were there. You could hear them crossing over. You could hear them impacting and all. It was just the life down there. So he really was nervous because he hadn't been there and kind of got, himself settled in. That's not necessarily for me, so I'm not going to bother with that one. Well, he was very nervous. But anyway, that night, he and I were going to room together. So they put us in a room and had a bed over here, a bed over there. And during the night, rockets, we could hear them coming. Well, during the night, his bed fell. It was a metal bed, and it was probably a couple of feet off the floor. I don't know exactly what happened, but his bed just gave loose and fell and made a terrific noise. You could have thought we'd been hit. And he just started yelling and screaming, oh, I've been hit, I'm hurt, they've got me. I mean, I can't tell you what everything he was saying. And I thought, wait a minute, I don't think so. I'm over here still in my bed. Anyway, we put the light on, and he realized his bed had fallen. But it embarrassed him later. But I told him, I said, don't worry about it, man. But that was kind of a humorous moment later as we looked at it. Another humorous moment I remember, my chaplain assistant and I were going to get on a Chinook, and he had never flown on a Chinook before. This was the first Chinook flight we were taking. And the crew chief could see him looking around, and he said, Sergeant Bennett, he read his name tag, Sergeant Bennett, you ever flown on a Chinook? No, never have. He said, well, let me tell you something. He said, matter of fact, this particular Chinook was served in Vietnam. And that was true. You could see the tail number, he said. They brought over a bunch of these old things they'd reworked and all. He said, now this is an old Chinook. He said, if you get on a Chinook like this, you need to look and see if it's leaking hydraulic fluid. Because if it's not leaking hydraulic fluid, it's out. So Sergeant Bennett, he gets kind of, his eyes got big. Well, after that, it was kind of funny because the next time we got on the Chinook, Sergeant Bennett, he checked things out. He said, Chaplain, we can stay on this one. It's leaking good. And I thought, you just got to laugh, man. You just got to roll with it and realize, okay, life is life. I had a surreal moment. The guy he was from India, real neat fella, but he was having a birthday party. So he invited us to come down to where they lived, and several of us, Chaplain, Sergeant Bennett and I, and another chaplain, we were invited to come down, and different people from our command. And we were there with the Indian workers, and we were eating steaks. And we're out in the wide open, music playing, and you could just hear mortars flying, and you could hear rockets firing. But you knew once you're there, okay, those aren't coming for us. They're over us. And it's a real moment. You're sitting there partying, and rockets are going this which way and this way. And it was just like, okay, this is life over here, man. You don't quit. You don't stop just because bad things are happening over there. You just carry on. And so you just kind of learn to adapt to where you are. You can't live in total panic. You can't, just live, okay, every moment thinking, okay, this is it. No, you just have to realize you're not in charge of that. So you just do what you need to do and make the most of it. But my time in Iraq was really a period of great ministry. But I'm sure you understand this, Dan. A lot of guys that I've talked to that went to Iraq or Afghanistan, they say they felt more alive in that setting than they've ever felt in life. And I think it was the adrenaline. You live with the adrenaline all the time. And that's why, and I'll just jump ahead for a second, that's why at Fort Bragg, we lose paratroopers once they've come home from a deployment and they survive firefights, but they come home and get on a motorcycle and go 140 miles an hour and kill themselves accidentally. They're looking for that adrenaline. They're looking for something that they can get back to that feeling, that you feel alive. You feel like, man, I'm in touch with life here. It's scary in a lot of ways, but you feed on it. And so I saw a lot of sides of all of that what it created, once you got home, especially in those guys down there. But when I was in Iraq, I was called upon to do memorial services over there. Our command trained the Iraqi police, and so we had a lot of civilian police that came from America. We had some from South Africa. We had them from all over the world. The police guys that came over volunteered to come and train the Iraqi police. Well, if any of them were lost, it was my job to do their memorial service in Iraq. And I remember doing memorial services for guys who were Muslim guys, who were Iraqi police, who were killed in events, or South African. I remember I did one for a South African guy. I did them for American police. And I didn't know those guys, but I did my best to honor their sacrifice. But we had to get out into the red zone to do those things. We did them at the Baghdad Hotel, which was a nasty area of Baghdad. But it was just one of those things. We had what we called a shark team that would take us over. These were civilian guys. These guys, you want to talk about Blackwater, that's what they were. And you felt safe with them. They were in up-armor Humvees. You didn't feel safe in the vehicle because those things didn't resist the EFPs very much. But you felt safe with them because they would put their life on the line for you just like that. So we had moments where we were under duress and under threat. We were going into the Baghdadi Hotel, and we saw a wall that had blood stains on it, and you saw a handprint in blood. And they said, yeah, a sniper got a guy there 2 days ago. Nobody ever cleaned the wall up, but it was just a reminder of the world that those people lived in. So Iraq, for me, a lot of painful memories, but a lot of good memories. I had a Marine guy who was in our command. He was a security detail for a Danish admiral. And he came to see me and he said, Chaplain, he said, every night I have a bad dream. I have a nightmare every night that I'm going to die. He said, I die in different ways. but I die in that dream. Now, I got a psychology degree, and I'd read things that you can't dream your own death. Well, I think he proved that wrong, because he said in his dreams he died, and then he would wake up. And he said, I'm terrified. He said, I'm going to do my job, but I'm terrified. So we got to talking, and I found out where he was coming from. He was from a family where his mother was a strong Christian. She had a strong faith. But he never had adopted her faith. But he said, but you know something? My mother tells me when I call her, or she sends me packages or letters, son, I'm praying for you. Son, I'm praying for you. Trust God. Trust God. And I said, well, would you like to do that? And he said, well, help me. So we talked, and anyway, he professed a faith. He accepted Christ into his life. And he was bold about it. He said, well, what do I do now? I said, well, if you would like, we can baptize you. He said, that's what I want to do. So we scheduled a baptism in one of Saddam's pools. He invited the Danish admiral. He invited everybody else on the detail. He invited other guys that came in from different groups. We had a large group gathered around this pool for this Marine's baptism. And I admired him for being so bold about it, that he said, I don't care what other people think. I found what I need. And he came back a number of times later. He'd stop in. He'd say, hey, I don't have that fear anymore. He said, I may die. And he signed his emails, I die before you. Kind of a fatalistic thing, but that's what his job called for. I die before you. But he said, I don't have that dream anymore either. So I saw from my perspective, the difference that faith could make in someone's sense of security, and someone's sense of well-being, and someone's sense of being okay if it happens. It's not the end.
So faith in the foxhole.
Faith in the foxhole
is real.
People have said, well, I've never met an atheist in the foxhole. Well, I hate to say it. I have. I've met some guys that even in that environment, they say, I don't need that stuff. And I'm not interested. Most of them, almost exclusively, would respect the chaplain, because they knew we didn't have to be there. And we didn't have a weapon. Chaplains are considered non-combatants by the Geneva Convention. Now, ISIS didn't respect that. Al-Qaeda didn't respect that. But we tried to honor that. And the chief of chaplains made it very clear. You will not carry a weapon. Your chaplain assistant is your bodyguard. And my chaplain assistant had an M4 with a scope. He had a 9mm, and he carried plenty of ammunition. And so I felt as safe as you could feel. I do remember one night we were dropped off by a Chinook at 2 o'clock in the morning at a place called Al-Qassiq. And first time we'd gone there. And it was in the middle of the night. The Chinooks only flew at night when I was there, because they're such big targets. They can get fast, but they're also like flying boxcars. So anyway, they flew at night. So they dropped us off at 2 a.m. We were going to make this visit. We didn't see anybody. There was nobody there at the LZ to pick us up. We didn't see a light. We didn't see anything, just the two of us. And my chaplain assistant looked at me and he said, I hope they didn't put us in the wrong place. Well, about 30 minutes later, and it must have been close to 30 minutes, we saw these lights come bouncing over berms. And the LZ for that particular training base was a pretty good ways off from the base. So the guy showed up to get us. I chewed them out. I said, what in the world, man? And they said, well, Chaplain, you don't understand. These flights come in here at such odd hours. We can't just sit here all night, because we don't know when they're coming. If we hear them, then we'll suit up and load up and come on over. I said, well, I'm going to tell you what, if you ever want me back up here, you try to find the target zone. I don't ever want to be sitting out here like this. I really didn't care later, because I knew we were okay. Mm-hmm. But that was a weird feeling. That was probably the one moment that I felt the most sense of potential harm. Mm-hmm. And that was shortly after some of our American soldiers had been captured. And when they recovered their bodies, Dan, it was horrible what they did to those guys. They literally used electric drills while they were alive and drilled out their joints before they would kill them by drilling out their brain. I mean, I saw pictures. I talked to people who saw the bodies, who did part of the recovery. And I thought then, I had sympathy for our American soldiers who said, I'm always going to save one bullet for myself. If I have one left, I will not be captured. And I understood that. And I know suicide, for me, that's not an option. But I tell you, I thought about it in that climate. And my chaplain assistant, he and I talked about it. Did we save one? And we never resolved that. But I do know that that was something that every American feared. We had an Iraqi female translator that was captured, and they brutalized her too. Her husband was one of our translators as well. And I talked to him later, and he said, "You won't believe what they did to my wife." And I mean, he finally had to leave because he had children, and he said, "I can't afford for both of us to be killed." And I would talk to translators all the time that would work in our camp, and they said, I live in Solder City, and what I do is just extremely dangerous. And if they knew I was here, and sometimes we would have people that worked in our maintenance area that didn't show up the next day, and somebody said, "Yeah, he was found dead." So it was that world that, I admired those people too, because they were risking a lot to work with us. And that's why I have a lot of empathy for our Afghanistan partners. And for what happened recently, it's just such a tragic thing, because so many of those folks, they were legit, man. And we can't forget them and just walk away from them just because of what one did. I don't know how you vet all of that, but it's such a, you develop such a feeling for partnership with folks that are willing to die with you or for you.
Absolutely, yeah. The patriots that we were able to interact with that were Iraqi, that gave their lives and wanted the same freedom and liberty that we wanted, and people 100, 200, 250 years ago in Americans, Revolutionary War, they kind of wanted the same thing. That was the hope of a lot of that to come, and it makes me sad sometimes with all the tactical successes that we had. The strategic success didn't bear out the way any of us really wanted, and so many gave so much in the ultimate of blood and treasure. That makes me sad. Sometimes it is exhausting decades, and then when you don't get the results, it makes it even harder sometimes
you
to
wonder, you
reconcile
don't feel
everything.
Like it was a wasted cause, and I don't look at it that way, because I had Iraqis tell me, "We want to be the 51st state," and you'd laugh with them and say, "Well, we wish that you could be, but we want you maybe to be the America of the Mideast." And I do believe this. I know that there's a generation of children, at least the ones I saw when I was there, that would come up to American soldiers who were carrying, but they'd come up and tug on your BDU jacket and just want you to play with them or give them a piece of candy or something. And I know that the ones that I saw in hundreds of villages in various places, I saw the children who had no fear of Americans, who loved Americans. And I believe there's that generation that still carry that memory of the Americans were good. You got a bad apple now and then, but the Americans by and large were good. They brought goodness. They brought hope. They cared about us. They tried to make our life better. So I just believe that there's still a lot of that was sown that will show itself up in various ways as time goes on.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I do too. I pray and hope for that on a lot of fronts. Transitioning a bit, we took a lot of casualties, and our military has a very deliberate process with casualty notification, assistance, the care that goes into bringing a body home. Much of that was depicted in a very good movie called Taking Chance that I think you've watched, and I recommend it every Memorial Day. But talk through that. I mean, you've met with lots of grieving parents, spouses, children, carried that all the way through for 150 different memorial services, but you touch the lives of a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
What's important for people to know that don't have that intimate knowledge of that process?
Mm-hmm.
What stands out that would be wise for others to get a better perspective on?
Well, I appreciate getting to talk about that because that was a very significant part of what I was allowed to do and privileged to do. It's the hardest job you'll ever have. I've said before, you couldn't give me $1 million to go knock on the door and tell a young wife that her husband was killed, or a young husband that his wife was killed. I wouldn't do it for $1 million. I would do it for my duty. I would do it out of love and compassion for them, but you couldn't pay me to do it. And having done it so many times, I know when I was at Fort Bragg, we were still in Class A's, the Greens, and when two people show up on your front porch at Fort Bragg, you know, on one occasion, I was accompanying a notification officer, and that's the way it works, by the way. The chaplain is technically not the notification officer. We go to support the family. We go to offer them whatever we can in the way of solace. But there's a notification officer. At least it's a senior NCO or usually a young officer, probably a captain. And I remember on one occasion, we went to the front door, and the wife saw us, and she went catatonic. She fell in the floor. She didn't even unlock the door. We couldn't have gotten in if we wanted to. But through a glass door, we saw her lying on the floor in a fetal position because she knew, and wailing. And so finally a teenage daughter that was in another part of the home came around and saw her mother and saw us. And we got in, and finally the wife, we got her into a chair, and the notification officer, he had to officially do what he had to do, so he did. And one thing about it, whenever we would make a notification, we would never leave a home until someone else came. And we stayed one time almost all night because they were waiting on a friend to come. But we just didn't go leave someone. Okay, we're going to give you this news, and we're out of here. No, that was part of when my job kicked in. And a lot of times, matter of fact, probably most of the time, they didn't remember what we would say. They didn't even remember the notification, except he's dead. But they certainly wouldn't remember what I said. But I had a number of them later, because I would follow up, and they would say, they thanked me for being there. They remembered my presence. But that I do appreciate our military in the sense that, I'll give you, just back up a minute. For instance, during even part of the Vietnam War, notifications were made by telegraph, a telegram. The Bedford Boys story of why the D-Day Museum is in Bedford, Virginia, is because 19 young men from that small little town died on D-Day. They were all part of the same company, National Guard company, and they all died on D-Day. So the way they would do it, the taxi companies, the yellow cab, would be given a telegraph to deliver to the home. And that's how the families found out. They would get a telegram. And that went on even up through the first few years of the Vietnam War, that if you lost your loved one, you'd get a telegram. And that's as cold as you can get. I know in World War II, it was almost impossible to do different because you had so many deaths. And of course, Vietnam, we lost almost 50,000. So it would have been hard then too. But during the Vietnam War is when it shifted to say, no, there will be a personal notification. And you will notify, you hope they filled out the paperwork right, where you know where their next of kin is. I ran into a situation once where it hadn't been updated. We went to a wrong house because the soldier had given his old address and never changed it. I don't know why he didn't at his mob station, but he didn't. So we show up at this door at 9 o'clock at night, And this family comes to the front door, and the notification officer said, "Is this the home of so-and-so?" They said, "No." And they didn't know where the family had moved to. So anyway, that's another story. That's a long story about how we finally found the family. It was a struggle. We went to the police department and one thing and another, but that was not cool. But we finally did find the right home. But when you make those notifications, you're basically giving what information you have without giving too much. You tell them a little bit of the circumstance. We regret to inform you that your husband was killed in a firefight in Fallujah or whatever, and then you don't give details, but you just let them know that now the next phase starts. And then, of course, after we leave, the notification officer, he hands it off to a family support officer, and you go from there. Generally speaking, the notification chaplain is not part of the service because, like it or not, you're tainted. You go in and they see you, and you're tied to that event. So usually and I was responsible at Fort Bragg for supervising 7 chaplains who would make these notifications and then travel across the country. And so the one that made the notification, I usually would pull him away. Well, obviously, he didn't go back into that setting, and we used another chaplain for support. But we could probably, on some occasions, it would have been fine. I did one during Desert Storm. I was called to make a notification, and I was in the North Carolina Guard, and our S1 called me, and he said, "Hey, we got to make a notification. A North Carolina Guardsman was killed, and he was a trucker, and the truck turned over, and he was killed in Saudi Arabia." So we went to the home, and they teach you not to make notifications. If you can't get in there by 2200, you wait till the next morning. You don't want to go there in the middle of the night or right in the middle of when they're trying to go to sleep. So anyway, it was getting close to the knockoff time, but we found the home. We go knock on the door. The notification officer is ready to tell his little story, and the wife said, "I've been waiting on you. I've been waiting on you." And we both were like, wondering what in the world. She said, "I know when he died." And later, it was confirmed that's exactly when he died. So she had this feeling and this sense that he was gone, and she knew it. He was gone, and she knew it. She was just waiting on us to come give her the official word. But this whole thing of supporting families, I mean, even not just notification, but when I was in Iraq, we lost a Navy commander. And that was, you talk about survivor's guilt. Several things about that young man, Philip Murphy Sweet, Commander Philip Murphy Sweet. Philip had voluntarily extended 2 weeks to finish a project he was working on, and he died in that extension. But his group were working on setting up Iraqi law centers, courthouses, buying police buildings for police stations, and that sort of thing. And so Philip, that particular day, the convoy was going out. They were in up-armored SUVs. He got into a different vehicle. Now, you know the superstition is pretty heavy in a war zone, just like sports. So those guys always like to sit in the same seat they did the day before. So Philip was sitting in the passenger seat, right behind not behind the driver, but the other side. And the guy that normally sat in that vehicle walks up and he said, "Hey, Phil, you're in my seat." And Phil was already buckled in, had all that stuff in, and he had his computer out. He said, "You just take mine and we'll switch out when we get to our next point." Well, the guy didn't want to do it. He said, "No, Phil, I want you to get out of my seat." Phil said, "No, I'm not moving, man. Go on back there." Well, that guy spoke at the memorial service that we did for Phil in Iraq. By the way, General Petraeus was there, General Dempsey, of course, and the ambassador. Philip was at that time the highest ranked Navy guy that we had lost. And so it was a big deal. But anyway, that guy spoke, and he couldn't hardly speak because he said he died literally in my place. It was an EFP that we know it was an Iranian design. It just burned right through the vehicle. It killed him and the interpreter immediately, and the 2 in the front died from injuries. But we did his memorial service, and his wife, I spoke to her a couple of times back and forth, and she sent me an email of something she wanted me to read. And then I sent her something to read at the funeral. And so just from a long distance, I was able to kind of support the family. And she was so gracious, thanking me for the privilege of me reading what she had and so forth. But it was that type of thing where chaplains, we basically just say, okay, you're at the worst place you can ever be in your life. We want to at least hold a hand with you and put a hand on your shoulder if possible. Sometimes literally, but always emotionally, and spiritually. But at Bragg, being the senior guy for the Rear D for the 82nd, I was assigned to, anytime the 82nd lost someone, and we lost several hundred. I was involved in about 150 or more, but we lost several hundred during my time as the Rear D. But the 82nd's motto is, we bury our own. A lot of other units didn't. They would let the Army assign a detail from the closest post for the burial party. But the 82nd said no. So they would train up squads for that duty, and they would be very efficient at it. I mean, the gun detail, the flag detail, everybody that was involved, they would be, it was 100%. These are paratroopers, and they know what looks good. So they would do their own detail. I mentioned in the book once, we did and I ended up going on this trip out to Chaplain, Missouri, and we were at the airport to receive the body like chance, only what I saw more often was a private charter would bring the body in. And so the charter had landed, and all of a sudden I see this van roll up, and it was an Air Force detail. They were the closest base, and so they were there for the transfer of the body to the hearse. Well, we had a detail there ready for that, and so I walk over to the young lieutenant. He looked young to me, and he was a lieutenant with the Air Force detail, and I said, now, for some reason, are y'all here for this? And he said, yeah, we're here. We got orders. I said, well, you're not needed. And he said, no, we're going to do it. We have orders, and we traveled a couple of hours or whatever. We're going to do it. I said, no, you're not going to do it. And I'd already talked to the NCO of the 82nd, and he said, they're not doing it, Chaplain. He said, you know that. I said, yeah, I know it. So I told the lieutenant, I said, son, listen to me. I don't want to pull rank on you, but I have rank on you. And I said, but I'm telling you this, it's not just what I would tell you. You see that Master Sergeant over there? He said, yeah. I said, he's not going to let you do it. Whatever it comes in, we're not going to embarrass his family. So I'm thanking you for coming, and I know you would do a great job, and I'd appreciate it, but you're not doing it. So you guys just still go to take a long lunch somewhere and tell your command thank you for sending you. But I don't know how that fell through the cracks that 82nd was going to be there. But anyway, we handled it, and it could have been an ugly situation, but we handled it as best we could. But the 82nd would send a detail, and I went on trips myself, several to California, Illinois, Iowa, Ohio, Missouri, Florida. I went all over the country just myself because we would have mass casualties, and all my chaplains were out. And so I was the only chaplain left to go, so I would go. Normally, I didn't make those trips, but I did make probably a dozen or more of those. And I tell you one other thing, Dan, on this while it comes to mind. We lost an airborne soldier from Concord, California. That's up near Berkeley. That's, as we well know, that's usually perceived to be a very liberal area, Berkeley. They were one of the first places, to protest the wars and all that sort of thing. But the little town of Concord, I think is the way they pronounced it, near Berkeley, it was one of the most little patriotic villages you've ever been in. They had that soldier's name on every marquee. You could put it on car washes, churches, businesses. And when we transported that young man from the airport to the funeral home, there were dozens and dozens of people on the sidewalks with their hands on their hearts that knew that was going to happen. And I was very impressed. Now, just to show you how typically the mindset I thought wouldn't have been to that degree of recognition or patriotism. We couldn't find the young man's mother for days. We found her in a treehouse in Mexico. She was a full-bore hippie, and she had moved with her boyfriend to Mexico, and they were living with a hippie group, but they were living in a treehouse. And they had to actually send somebody to the treehouse. There was no phone. We found her through her sister who lived somewhere outside of California. And she said, well, this was last known address. Anyway, we got her up there. She was definitely had the hippie mindset. But she was so grateful for the way everyone was caring for her son, and so thankful for that. I mean, I perceived she might have been angry, because I could tell she wasn't really for war or even supporting anything like that on the one hand, but on the other, she appreciated her son, that was his decision, and that he paid a price. He needed to be honored, not despised. And so she took that high road and thanked us, and the service went well. But it was a climate where I realized, you got people here that are totally adamant against what this young man chose to do. And how could he come out of an environment like that? But then as I looked around, I said, wow, he's not the only one.
Yeah, it's look at moms and dads across America gift their loved ones to service in the military. I remember my mom, all proud and excited, but at the same time, a little bit of tear coming down when I first joined. And it's every one of their worst nightmares. And to have a dignified process of notification and assistance all the way through to a memorial service and funeral is vital to kind of help those families cope with the reality of all of that. Thank you for sharing all of that, and thank you for your great service. Well, I appreciate you being real for a lengthy career in the military and how you continue to do it as well. So, Chaplain, Colonel, Joel, my brother in Christ, thank you for all you've done, do, and continue to do.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate you, brother. God bless.
God bless.